In the final stretch of the Second World War, an event both astonishing and exceptional took place, which became one of the most important, yet less popularly known, milestones of the armed conflict. On the 5th of May, 1945, in Tyrol, Austria, an engagement occurred that united Germans, Americans, and French officials on the same side. However, one fascinating fact that differentiates this battle from others is that it did not occur in an open field, on a bridge, or in a meadow. This fierce confrontation took place in a castle, and accordingly it is known as the Battle of Itter Castle. Every single second of this struggle was astonishing, and every detail is worthy of a Hollywood film. Prepare yourself, because in just a few seconds you will learn absolutely everything that happened in the spectacular Battle of Itter Castle. Let us begin. It was May 1945, and the Second World War was experiencing its culminating moments. The Allies had been operating inside German territory for several weeks. The Nazi army was going through its worst phase in the conflict, and the Red Army was being crowned victorious in the Battle of Berlin. On the 1st of May, rumors about Adolf Hitler's suicide were growing stronger, but due to the communication conditions of that time, the information had not yet reached every corner of Europe. At that time, no one imagined that the war would include an unprecedented episode that would undoubtedly mark the outcome of the bloodiest conflict in history. Itter Castle, the unexpected protagonist of the last days of the war, is located in the city of Tyrol, Austria. It is a fortress situated atop a hill that is 666 meters in height, at the entrance to the Brixental Valley. Although the exact motivation for its construction is unknown, records indicate that it was built in the year 1241. However, some specialists maintain that as early as the 10th century, the first interventions in the area had already been carried out. At that time, the valley was a possession of the Prince Bishop of Regensburg and served as the administrative seat of the Counts of Ortenburg. Apparently, the purpose of Itter Castle was to protect the properties of Regensburg from the incursions launched by the neighboring archbishops of Salzburg, who in 1312 managed to take possession of the fortress. However, in 1380, the bishops decided to sell the building to Archbishop Peregrine II of Salzburg. During the year 1526, the German Peasants' War took place, during which Itter Castle was atrociously devastated. At the beginning of the 19th century, the ruined grounds were used by the locals of the Kingdom of Bavaria as a quarry, and in 1878, the current castle began to be erected. 6 years later, it was purchased as a residence by Sophie Menter, a pianist who took lessons with the renowned composer Franz Liszt. In 1938, with the annexation of Austria into the Reich, known as the Anschluss, the castle fell into the hands of Adolf Hitler's chancellery, which in 1940 opted to return it to its owner, Franz Gruner. However, the castle's fate would change once again, and its new reality would be directly connected with the Battle of Itter Castle. On the 7th of February 1943, Oswald Pohl, a renowned lieutenant general of the SS, was sent by Heinrich Himmler to convert the fortress into a prison. From the 25th of April of that same year onward, it was used to incarcerate French prisoners whose lives were considered valuable enough by the Third Reich to keep them safe and in better conditions than in other, more precarious locations. Among the most prestigious prisoners that Hitler decided to safeguard in Itter were General Maurice Gamelin, former Prime Ministers Édouard Daladier and Paul Reynaud, former Commander-in-Chief Maxime Weygand, Maria Agnès, sister of the leader of the French resistance Charles de Gaulle, the trade unionist Léon Jouhaux, tennis champion and sports minister Jean-Robert Borotra, the former fascist orator François de la Roque, and Michel Clemenceau, son of Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau, among others. It is worth noting that these prisoners represented various ideologies, so they did not share meals and made an effort to avoid one another in the corridors of the building. However, the French officials were not alone, as over time prisoners from Eastern Europe were also added, employed for maintenance work and domestic tasks. Despite being a prison, it was nothing more than a sub-camp under the administration of the Dachau concentration camp, located about 145 kilometers away, and which, by that time, already housed more than 200,000 prisoners, most of them Jews. The castle's guest rooms were converted into both cells and offices, used by the High Command of the SS. In addition, the various entrances and exits were modified to prevent any attempt at escape. Nevertheless, the French prisoners enjoyed certain privileges. Although their dormitories served as prisons, they retained their luxurious style and the original comfortable beds. Unlike the majority of the captives of the Second World War, these prisoners were held alongside their wives in the same facility. They also enjoyed sophisticated meals, as it suited the Nazis for them to remain in good health to continue serving as informants. Furthermore, they were allowed to stroll through the castle gardens. The entire castle was guarded by the feared SS Totenkopfverbände, also known as the Death's Head Units, commanded by the ruthless SS captain Sebastian Wimmer, who already had accumulated experience serving in the Majdanek concentration camp. On the 6th of June 1944, the Allies landed in Normandy, in what became known as D-Day, and began their advance through Europe. When they approached Austria, they received information about a supposed fortress that was harboring French prisoners. It was, of course, Itter Castle. Thus we arrive at May 1945. Hitler had committed suicide, and in Germany, the last flames of a fire that would soon be extinguished were burning. On the 2nd of May, the castle experienced a dramatic episode that seemed to foreshadow the inevitable. Eduard Weiter, the last commander of Dachau, followed in Hitler's footsteps and took his own life. As if it were a domino effect, the rest of the castle staff chose to desert, leaving the prisoners completely on their own. However, contrary to what anyone might think, escaping was not an easy task. The outskirts of the castle were still guarded by Nazi sentries, and a single misstep could cost them their lives at the worst possible moment, precisely when the end of the war seemed imminent. For that reason, they chose to wait for the rescue by the Allies, in whom they placed their only hope. On the 3rd of May, an unexpected move changed everything. Zvonimir Čučković, a Croatian prisoner of war and a member of the Yugoslav communist resistance, worked as a caretaker within the castle. In an act of bravery, he left the fortress under the pretext of running an errand for the prison commander, Sebastian Wimmer, who by that time had already fled. The Nazis believed his lie, allowing him to leave the castle bound for the city. Čučković knew that he must not delay too long, as any mistake could cost him his life. He walked to Innsbruck, 64 kilometers away, where he found the 409th Infantry Regiment of the 103rd Infantry Division, belonging to the 6th Corps of the United States Army. In one of his pockets, he carried a letter written in English, in which he informed the recipient about the situation at Itter Castle. Unfortunately, the fortress was located outside the jurisdiction of that military division. Nevertheless, they managed to get in touch with their superiors, who prepared a rescue team equipped with a large arsenal and war tanks. However, while passing through the town of Jenbach, the mission was halted by intense enemy artillery. Later, the operation was withdrawn because it was encroaching upon the territory of the 36th Infantry Division of the United States. As a result, only 2 jeeps with auxiliary personnel were able to proceed, which were insufficient for the magnitude of the situation at Itter. Meanwhile, the prisoners in the castle feared for their lives. The caretaker had not returned, and they found themselves completely surrounded by Gestapo agents, fanatical units of the Waffen-SS, mountain soldiers, Wehrmacht troops, as well as members of the Hitler Youth and civilian militias. Although they found some weapons left behind in the abandoned guard offices, these were not enough to confront the dozens of men who guarded the area, so they dared not venture outside. The situation was absolutely desolate, and their lives hung by a thread. Suddenly, among their belongings, the detainees found a French flag and decided to place it atop the castle so that the Allies would not bomb it. Due to Čučković's delay in arriving and after debating the best way to proceed, they opted to take an inevitable risk. two prisoners took bicycles that they found in the castle and set out in search of help. A cook, whose name was Andreas Krobot, managed to contact the Austrian resistance in the city of Wörgl. Krobot announced that the forces of the Wehrmacht had abandoned the castle area, but that it remained occupied by other Nazi factions. Immediately they took him to see Josef Gangl, a former officer and leader of a unit of ex-Wehrmacht soldiers who had chosen to withdraw and join a local resistance group led by Rupert Hagleitner. During his cooperation with the German army, he received the Iron Cross First Class, the Iron Cross Second Class, and the German Cross in Gold. He participated in the so-called War of Lies at the beginning of the Second World War and was later sent to the Western Front, where he commanded a reconnaissance unit of the 25th Infantry Division of the Wehrmacht. Subsequently, he fought on the Eastern Front, more precisely in the Battle of Kiev. Nevertheless, Gangl knew that he could not help the French on his own, as his unit only had 20 men. That was why he had no choice but to go out in search of help. He was sure that by finding units of the Allied forces, they could defeat the pro-Hitler Germans who were still warily guarding Itter Castle. It might sound far-fetched to imagine cooperation between Germans and Americans, which makes this episode of the war as unusual as it is extravagant. Gangl was aware that the Nazi fanatics would fire at any window or door that bore a white or Austrian flag. However, he decided to take the risk and set out to find an American division with a white flag in the hope that they would hear him. He began to walk, looking in all directions, trying to evade the enemy without losing sight of any possible allies who might appear. 13 kilometers later, he arrived in Kufstein, an Austrian town. There he found Lieutenant Jack Lee, only 27 years of age, accompanied by 4 Sherman tanks and the 23rd Tank Battalion of the 12th Armored Division of the 21st United States Corps. With some apprehension, Gangl approached Lee and explained what had happened. The Allied lieutenant did not hesitate and volunteered to lead the rescue mission. Lee knew that he did not have enough vehicles to safely escort all the prisoners out of the castle, so he radioed his superiors. After securing a vehicle to protect a strategic bridge that was in a fragile state, they advanced towards the castle, recruiting 5 tanks along the way until they arrived just at dusk. What lay ahead was not just another battle. In an almost unprecedented setting, Germans and Americans joined forces to defeat Nazi troops, an extremely unusual event in the Second World War. After advancing together a little over 6 kilometers away, they spotted SS troops, who were thirsting for confrontation and seeking to establish a blockade on the road. However, Gangl, Lee, and their respective units defeated them without difficulty in a brutal exchange of fire. Upon arriving at the castle, Captain Lee held an important meeting with the new leader of the castle, Kurt Siegfried Schrader, an experienced former captain of the Waffen-SS who had fought in the Battle of Leningrad among other fronts and had been taken prisoner after opposing Adolf Hitler. The French captives had turned to him, trusting him because he was a Nazi defector, and begged him to lead the castle's defenses, which Schrader accepted enthusiastically. Furthermore, it is necessary to mention that the French prisoners, upon seeing the arrival of the defending troops, felt somewhat disillusioned due to their lack of numbers. However, it was not a time for debates or anger, so each one of those present in the castle took up a position and prepared both for the offensive and for the defense. They knew that an ironclad concentration was necessary in order to emerge victorious, and more importantly, to leave the castle alive. Lieutenant Lee positioned his tank, nicknamed Besotten Jenny, similar to an M4A3E8 EZ-8, at the main entrance, ready to face the imminent enemy siege and to prevent the Germans from physically entering the castle. With the aim of not confusing Gangl's men with the enemy, they placed a piece of black cloth on the left arm of the German soldiers. Even though they were completely determined to begin the duel, the defenders of Itter Castle knew that with so few soldiers, the chances of ending up as victors were significantly reduced. For that reason, Gangl requested reinforcements from the Austrian resistance, which provided them with 2 German soldiers and 1 Austrian teenager. Both Gangl and the rest of the rebel Germans knew that if they were defeated, they would be accused of treason and brutally executed by the Nazi ranks. In fact, one of the members of the resistance chose to flee, overwhelmed by the fear of a possible and scandalous defeat. What this man did not know was that the forest into which he leapt was being heavily watched by the enemy. Lee feared that the same might happen to other members of the resistance, and for that reason he planned to confiscate their weapons. But Gangle managed to convince him to remain optimistic, so the issue did not escalate any further. Meanwhile, Lee's tank, positioned on the main road, continued firing in order to hold off the enemy, which was crucial if they intended for the enemy not to enter the building. On the 5th of May, the Waffen-SS initiated what would later become an unrelenting siege. Initially, they did not make any major moves. The first thing they did was to send a reconnaissance unit that surrounded the perimeter and attacked the castle directly with the aim of finding its weak points. At the break of dawn, between 100 and 150 soldiers of the Waffen-SS, with their MG-42 machine guns in hand, participated in a fierce attack. They then found themselves battling against German weapons, since the prisoners used the examples they had found in the offices of the guards who had deserted. The confrontation had reached a critical point, and the prisoners decided to disobey an order from Lee. The American leader had ordered them to remain in cover, but they decided to move to the outer sector to support their American comrades, the rebel Germans and the resistance fighters. The Sherman tanks, which were positioned strategically around the castle, began to return fire against the Nazi assault, seeking to dispel every kind of danger. The response did not take long to arrive, coming from an 8mm anti-tank gun, a 75mm gun, and a 20mm gun. The battle had only just begun, and in the very first hours the sky was filled with gunpowder. The flames encircled the outskirts of the castle, and the smoke made it difficult for anyone not wearing protective goggles to see. It became impossible to hear the words of the comrade next to you, as the noise of the machine guns drowned out any other sound. The intensity increased with every passing second, and everything indicated that the confrontation would continue for at least a few more hours. Since there were neither thousands of soldiers nor hundreds of tanks, vehicles and guns, everyone knew that the combat would last no longer than a day. However, despite having small battalions, every now and then the soldiers and prisoners came across corpses scattered on the ground. Amid the chaos, dreadful news reached Gangle's ears. Lee's Sherman had been brutally defeated, to the point of being reduced to rubble. Fortunately for the castle's prisoners, the crew managed to survive, including Jack Lee. The SS were emboldened and advanced ever further. Not a single prisoner maintained any optimism. Despite their expressions of concentration, a look of resignation could be seen on their faces. Everything seemed lost. All of a sudden, Gangle looked to one side and observed that Reynaud, the French Prime Minister, was in danger. Quickly, he dodged bullets and projectiles, rolled across the ground and reached his protégé. He lunged ferociously, ensuring that no adversary managed to touch him. Gangle succeeded in saving the French official and, from the ground, with his gaze, made sure that his charge was in optimal condition. Soon he began to feel an intense pain in his body. He looked at his chest and saw it filling with blood. The projectile that had been aimed at Reynaud struck him instead. Before dying, Joseph Gangle surely felt proud for having given everything for his comrades. The outlook was alarming, and not even the most optimistic saw any possibility of emerging alive. However, a miracle was about to occur. The aforementioned prisoner, Jean-Robert Borotra, a tennis player who had won the Grand Slam title 4 times, took advantage of his excellent physical condition to leap over the castle walls and penetrate the SS lines. Having already served as a messenger on previous occasions, he knew the terrain and knew where to find reinforcements. Borotra was aware that if he managed to locate an American battalion, the chances of emerging victorious would be unparalleled. As if it were a gift from beyond, orchestrated by the recently deceased Joseph Gangle, Borotra spotted in the distance a group of soldiers with their full equipment. He ran quickly until he realized that it was none other than the 142nd Infantry Regiment of the United States. The unit committed itself to helping him, and Borotra was elated. In a moment of clarity, he requested a United States soldier's uniform, which was kindly provided to him. Around 16 hours, with the newly arrived Barotra on the battlefield, the ammunition on the castle's side seemed to be on the verge of running out. But a new miracle saved them. The American Rescue Column, equipped with tanks, half-tracks, jeeps, and troops, appeared at the castle at just the right moment. When the Nazi ranks noticed the arrival of enemy reinforcements, they felt great dismay and consternation. "Panzer! Panzer!" they shouted wildly and inconsolably. They knew that, after being on the verge of victory, they were only minutes away from dying and from ending one of the final episodes of World War II. So, with more shame than dignity, they decided to flee, not giving the 142nd Infantry Regiment the opportunity to participate in the duel. Their mere presence proved to be more intimidating than the sound of their gunfire. In any case, the castle's defenders could not conceive of the possibility that their enemies would escape alive, since, as the famous saying goes, a soldier who flees is fit for another war. So they chased after them and managed to catch up with 100 men, who then became prisoners. After the end of this battle, an event that had taken place hours earlier acquired a greater significance than its protagonists had imagined. When Barotra went out in search of help, he encountered 2 war correspondents, among whom was the French-Canadian René Lévesque, who sometime later would become the Prime Minister of Quebec. Given the worldwide fame of the former tennis player, the reporter recognized him immediately. Barotra invited him to follow along so that he could document the event in great detail. In this way, the Battle of Itter Castle became the only documented case in which American and German soldiers fought with the same purpose and within the same battalion. Besides this confrontation, there was only one other event in which Germans and Americans fought together, an event that was not photographed. This was Operation Cowboy, which took place on the 28th of April, 1945, in Hostau, a city located in the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia in Nazi Germany. On the 7th of May, 1945, 2 days after the fierce confrontation, Germany surrendered unconditionally to the Allies. Thus, it was announced on the 8th of May of that same year, at 23:01 hours, that the German armed forces would cease fighting. The document was signed by Dwight Eisenhower, President of the United States, and a Soviet general. Subsequently, Captain Jack Lee received the Distinguished Service Cross for his bravery on the battlefield. Moreover, after his death, Joseph Gangl was named a National Hero of Austria for his courage as a member of the anti-Nazi resistance. His body was buried in the city of Wörgl, and decades later, a street was named in his honor. On the other hand, Sebastian Wimmer, an SS commander who had managed to escape from Itter Castle, avoided being tried at the Nuremberg trials, but in 1952 he ended up committing suicide. In turn, Captain Kurt Siegfried Schrader was tried and sent to prison, from which he was released in 1953. Subsequently, he took up a position in the Ministry of the Interior of Westphalia. Finally, many have wondered what would have happened if the Nazi ranks had managed to defeat the defenders of Itter Castle and consequently had ended the lives of the French prisoners. In that case, the destiny of post-war France would probably have been different, since the majority of the captives were important officials who later had a significant influence on the decisions that the Gallic country made during the 21st century. This was the astonishing Battle of Itter Castle, which lasted only 1 day, but will forever remain in history as the confrontation that united those who had been enemies throughout World War II. We look forward to seeing you in the next video.